remember when the oceans drowned the rivers and lakes, when the towns became communities of grottos, and the hundreds of cities each became their own modern-day Atlantis. Nowadays, we just call it year one, kind of like resetting the clock, if you'll pardon the metaphor. I could never forget when they filed us in one after the other, dark eyes looking us up and down, ordering an "Are you sick?" here, or a "Do you have any conditions or disabilities?" there. Just two of the many subtle hints for "Can we keep you off the boat to save room?" They pressed for occupations too. "Can you do this?" or "Are you that?" I suppose I got lucky when they waved me through. I nervously managed to say local bartender and waited for the punching blow of "You'll have to step out of line, sir." But I guess they saw something useful in me, enough to give me my own second-class cabin with a big main room for a makeshift tavern. It was a new lifetime, one in which we all lived together on the Leviathan, a massive boat made to preserve life and brave the rising waters. It was then that I met Feuerknockel, the stoutest old German fellow you ever saw. His name literally meant fire ankle, but nobody ever dared ask him why. I think he fancied himself something of an Achilles among us lesser folk. Every day he would dive from the stern of the Leviathan on his popsicle stick wings, and a few nights later he would return with stories, and on a few rare occasions seafood, which I would cook up and we would share while he told me his tales. He was something of a Da Vinci, insane to some, eccentric to others, and to us few who truly saw him for what he was, a genius. There weren't many artists left, but I think he beat any artist I've ever seen, before or after the flood. Whenever Knockel came back from his flights, he'd always stop by my bar the same night. I always made it a point to ask him what he discovered during his trip. 4 months ago was the most exciting story I've heard in a long while. He saved a young woman from a ramshackle band of scraggly bearded pirates who threw anchors at him in an attempt to shoo him away. He landed without a hitch and grabbed up the lass, untying her as the two flew away. He made sure to fly out into the horizon in the opposite direction of our boat before flying back. It took him 2 days to make the full trip, circling back and reaching the boat, but the story was fully worth it, and the pirates were none the wiser of where we were. There we were, the only somewhere in an ocean of nowhere, him and his Popsicle Wings folded behind his back, throwing back whiskey and bourbon, me with my usual glass of scotch. I asked Knockel if he had ever drank scotch. He told me it wasn't so, and I asked him how he could call himself fire anything without having tried scotch. He just extended his brilliant wings and grunted, unamused by my pestering, and I sure enough backed off, though not before slipping a bit of scotch into his bourbon. I couldn't deprive the man of such a fine drink, and in the end I think he appreciated it. He wasn't too popular with the ladies, Knockel. I mean, he surely was a fine-looking man for his age, but something about the way he walked, the way he talked too, just didn't give off a sense that he was looking for loving. I knew he got lonely, better than anybody else. Some days I would wonder if he'd come back, if one day he'd find his paradise island and never return. As much as he went off on his own, though, we had collectively given him a leash, chaining him here with his familiarity to all of us, whether we knew it or not. It was just a while back when he told me his last story. He had indeed found an island. A second somewhere? I asked him, surprised. The only somewhere I've ever seen outside of here. His eyes were stone set on me. Well, there was the pirate ship and that palm tree, I reminded him. They hardly count as somewheres, more like pseudo-wheres. They can try as they might to be somewhere, but nowhere is quite somewhere as this ship. Foyer tapped impatiently on the wooden table, making a thumping loud enough that I feared he may split the table. I get your point. Now tell me what you saw already, I said. I saw a dark island. There was a cold white sheen of snow and ice covering the surface of the island's middle. I tried to get to the land below, but when I tried to dig down, my hands burned. They were so cold. I got to the bottom of the snow, but there was a glossy wall of ice covering the people below. I managed to see their faces. He shifted in his chair, clearly shaken by the memory. They didn't move at all. They just stood there and looked at me. Some of them looked like they were screaming, but I couldn't hear them through the wall of ice. I slammed my fists on the ice, tried to break it, but they just burned, and the more I tried to break through. Knockel was silent for a long time. He sipped his drink and lowered his head. His wings drooped. I think he was crying into his glass. It was the first time I had ever seen Foyer cry. That was no way to be in a bar, I thought. A bar's a happy place, and Knockel was the happiest guy I knew. What else happened? I asked him. Nothing. I got too cold and had to turn back. I tried to go back the next day, but the place was gone. Either I lost my way or was swept away with the tide. I just don't feel the same after that. His voice was shaking. I felt awful, seeing him so vulnerable, so weak. You've just gotta buck up, Knockle. You've got all of us. We're still with you. What does a few people stuck matter? He just got up and walked off. It matters a lot, he said, and that was the last time we spoke. Nobody saw head or tail of Foyer for weeks. Some of us thought he had finally flown off for good. Maybe he dove too low and drowned, or maybe at last he found his paradise island. I didn't know what to think, only that I felt in some way responsible for his disappearance. It was 2 months ago today that they found him in his bedroom. He didn't make a mess, just hung limply from his ceiling fan. It was a classic suicide, but with no note, no apparent reason for his self-destruction. I had never felt more guilty, or more alone. I received a package addressed from him about a week after hearing the news. It was a big thing, but it was light to the touch. I sat on my bed and opened it carefully. Inside was a note, what I supposed was his suicide letter, to me personally. The note was headed with 2 words, "Thank you." I breathed a sigh of relief and read the message beneath. "I want you to have them. They've served me well, but I've seen all I must. I've seen beautiful things. I've done fantastic things, but I've also felt the windy silence of nowhere, the crushing loneliness of having the power, but with nobody to share it. I leave my wings to you. They're the only ones right now, but I've been working on another pair. Look in my locker. The code is the year we first met. Inside you'll find the unfinished wings. Take them, finish them, give them to somebody you admire, somebody you love. Enjoy life, my friend. I've had my fill, but you're young and filled with vigor. I admire you so much. I'd like you to have the happiness I once had. Maybe one day we'll fly together. On real wings, then? Perhaps. I'll see you on the other side. Sincerely, Foyer Knockle." I opened the locker with the code 0001. The first year him and I met. It's funny, in a way, almost as if he and I had known each other since we were born, or reborn, rather. Indeed, inside the locker was a half-finished pair of wings. I still haven't finished them, but I met the young lady Knockle saved that night months ago. I think I'll ask her if she would fly with me. It would only make sense. I think old Foyer had meant a lot to her, too. So that's the story of Foyer Knockle, the stoutest German I ever saw, with the strongest spirit I'll ever see. Cross my heart.